Hello YouTube and YouTubettes. Welcome to an album review. I have a very special formula that I use to make grades, so you will hear fractions and like a 5.73 or whatever. I won't give that away, but in this video, I would like to review the Four Seasons album, The Genuine Imitation Life Gazette. This was released in January of 1969, I don't have an exact date, and produced by Bob Gaudio, who is one of the members of the Four Seasons. The members listed here are Tommy DeVito, Bob Gaudio, Joe Long, and Frank Valli. Frank Valli is the one most people are familiar with because they have been called Frank Valli in the Four Seasons in several albums. But this album, they're simply called The Four Seasons. Now, I have been a fan of The Four Seasons, not necessarily a hardcore fan, but, a fan in passing. As somebody who enjoys oldies, and as a Beach Boys fan, I appreciate the harmonies and everything, but I've never delved deep into their music. But an online friend recently, probably a few months ago, told me about this album, and I looked it up, and it is incredible from top to bottom. I can hear a bit of Frank Zappa, kind of like early Mothers of Invention. I'm a big fan of that stuff. I could hear some of that mixed in with like 40s kind of stuff and psychedelic, obviously, and even some hints of what would become a group known as the Polyphonic Spree, which is a group I really enjoy from my area of Dallas, and I've seen them live many times, and as well as I've met many members from that group. But what amazes me is how they're kind of parallel the Beach Boys in many ways. I mean, they came along at the same time, and they're both American, and they both are harmony-based. Other than that, the style of music is very different. So there's not much the same except for the harmonies. But I really do enjoy the Four Seasons. Their singing is good, but it's more of a barbershop kind of style than, say, the Beach Boys as far as vocally. But this one has a lot of jazz kind of stuff to it. Very interesting, creative. I really love this album. The album cover is stylized as a newspaper, also contains an 8-page newspaper-like insert, which I've not seen because I haven't bought the album, I downloaded it on iTunes, so I don't have the booklet or anything. But it looks like a newspaper, and especially done comic strips by Skip Williamson and Jay Lynch. So that's pretty interesting. I like the idea of it, and I'm pretty sure I'd be interested in looking at the whole booklet. It's not necessarily a great cover in my opinion, but I still give it an 8 out of 10 for the cover. Now on to the songs. The first song on the album is called American Crucifixion Resurrection, written by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This one is, I love the haunting vocals at the beginning, and then it goes into this section that reminds me of the Polyphonic Spree, and then it breaks into some sort of melody that reminds me of a Frank Zappa song. I love this, and it's very psychedelic, and yet has a lot of familiar classical or 40s kind of music styles to it. So this one's a very artistic song, and it does well artistically, a little bit lower on the commercial and accessibility side of it, but it does a very solid and strong 8.6 out of 10. The next song is called Mrs. Stately's Garden by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This song has kind of a swingy, lounge, upbeat kind of song, and it also kind of reminds me of the way the harmonies are and the way the style of music is the band Yes. I'm not a huge fan of Yes, but I've heard a little bit of them, and they're pretty good. I just never gotten into them, and I probably will someday. But this song kind of reminds me of that, just very swinging. This one does a little less on the artistic side. It's a little more catchy instead of artistic, but it's a nice song and it does very well. Not one of my favorites on the album, but I give it a 7.8 out of 10. The next song is called Look Up, Look Over by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This one, I spoke too soon when I said earlier that the Four Seasons and Beach Boys don't musically compare much other than harmonies, but the piano at the beginning of this song and even going into it sounds like something Brian Wilson would do, so there is more similarities here. And then it gets into this very beautiful, haunting melody and great vocal by, I think it's Frankie Valli singing, but I'm not sure. It's a wonderful, beautiful song. I give this song an 8.0 out of 10. The next song is called Something on Her Mind, written by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This one, I love the introduction, has kind of that 20s organ style to it, and then it gets into this typical upbeat lounge kind of song, but it's not one of my favorites. It is a kind of a catchy song. I give it a 7.6 out of 10.
She wakes them in the...
Next song is called Saturday's Father by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. And this one has a very random intro that's very fast and weird, and then it gets into the soft thing, which reminds me of another thing I forgot to mention about this album is it's similar to the Zombies, Odyssey and Oracle. And this song is a bit more towards that, I think, that side of things. It almost has like a British 60s psychedelic style to it on this song. Very, very beautiful, very artistic, and I give this song an 8 out of 10. The next song is called Wall Street Village Day, written by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This one starts out with this piano thing and it speeds up and then kind of turns more into more of the Frank Zappa kind of style, at least melodically. A bit of hints of Broadway musical, some kind of crazy Broadway musical song or something. But I really do enjoy this song. It's very different and very unique. It's very consistent across the board on my grades. And I give it an 8.2 out of 10. The next track is Genuine Imitation Life, written by Jake Holmes. This is the only song that's not written by both Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This is just Jake Holmes. I love the harpsichord. I'm a huge fan of the harpsichord, and that's how the introduction is, and so that will always suck me in at the beginning. Then it kind of goes into this kind of mellow thing that also reminds me of sort of Broadway musical style, something that would be in a Broadway musical or something, and it's very kind of a 60s groovy style, if that makes sense. And I really love this song. It's high on the artistic side for me and high across the board, and it is the highest score of any song on this album, so I guess it's my favorite. And I give it an 8.8 out of 10. The next song is called Idaho, once again by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. I love the instrumentation at the beginning of this song. It is very interesting and very unique, and the arrangements are really cool. And then it gets into this another kind of Broadway musical style, but with a very 60s groovy instrumentation behind it, and the barbershop style harmonies that the Four Seasons are known for. and I love this. This is really cool. And this one does well across the board, and I give it an 8.6 out of 10.
Wonder what to be.
The next song is called Wonder What You'll Be Like by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. And this one starts out reminding me of like the Beatles kind of a thing, but then it gets into something completely different than the Beatles ever did. Very odd chord changes and melody that's very interesting. Once again, reminiscent of something that might be in a Broadway musical. This one is actually one of the weaker songs, but I say that in quotations because there really isn't a weak song on this album. It is not one of my favorites, but it's still a very interesting song. I give it a 7.6 out of 10. The final song on the album is called Soul of a Woman by Bob Gaudio and Jake Holmes. This one starts out very hauntingly beautiful, and I think it's really cool when the trumpets come in. I really love that part. And it has this very hauntingly beautiful melody, and then it gets into something heavy, sort of more of the Broadway musical style meets a Frank Zappa song, and then it gets back to the hauntingly beautiful thing again. Wonderful song to end the album, and it does well across the board, and I give it an 8.2 out of 10. The flow of the album is great, a 10 out of 10 for me. There's really no weaknesses of the album. It is very similar in style throughout, yet it's always interesting. There's a lot of interesting things throughout this album. Odd chord changes and odd melodies and haunting and musical surprises, and it's just great throughout. So the flow of the album, I give a 10 out of 10. Now I grab my handy dandy calculator and punch in the numbers, and this album gets an 8.28 out of 10. Thank you and have a wonderful day.